Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another film slash book review. And today's film slash book review is none other than The Hunger Games. Now, this is mostly going to seem a little bit confusing at first because it currently says The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1. Now, to kind of essentially help you out with this, I had to do a little bit of research into this myself. But essentially, if you read the book, the Mockingjay Part 1 all goes up till about chapter 14, and then everything beyond that is supposedly supposed to be the second half of the Hunger Games book. Now, to simplify this even more for you, let's just kind of ground it down to the basics. Part 1 is about them trying to get a message across to the capital to essentially say, look, Katniss Everdeen is alive, she's well, and she is fighting back for the districts. Part 2 is essentially this kind of wake-up call to Katniss that something has been done to Peter. Peter has been hijacked, as they like to call it in the book and in the film, by the capital. They have brainwashed this young man, they have pretty much pushed him over the edge, and they've put him at a non-starting point in which he is so unrecognisable to his friends. On top of this, Snow essentially begins to use every card in his playbook to push the Mockingjay so far that she will become as bad as him. Now, to backtrack really quick, let's go into the context of the book and the film, because to be fair, there's not much of a difference between this book and its film, minus a couple subtle details. For starters, the story starts off pretty basic with the fact that essentially we're waking up from the Quarter Quell. This is not a story that is brand new, this is more of a story continuation. The Quarter Quell is over, Katniss has disrupted the district and destroyed the game. She's found herself in District 13, which she believed not to exist. Suddenly, she finds herself in the company of a woman named Coin and Plutchard. Katniss recognises Plutchard because Plutchard was part of the previous games. To her knowledge, he's just a game maker and is part of Snow's army. Little does she know is he's actually kind of more than that. He works for the rebellion. He has his own motives in this war. Coin and the rest of District 13 essentially try and coerce Katniss into being the Mockingjay. Now, Katniss isn't too up for this, even though she knows that Cinna had a bigger power and a bigger idea behind why he chose her as the Mockingjay. She doesn't just want to be doing some propaganda for some regime. She needs more convincing. And what's making it worse for Katniss to be convinced by these people is the fact that she's gone down to the basement and found all of her staff have basically been beaten up. All of her stylists have been treated like crap. So Coin and her rebellion really need to start convincing her. Meanwhile, she finds herself going back and forth between Prim and her mother as they begin to walk around the facility and get used to this new lifestyle. Katniss then persuades the rebels to allow her and Gale to go hunting for a while. Eventually, she gets put into the battle zone when she goes to go and look at a wounded hospital. However, after a couple minutes of leaving the hospital, it turns out that the capital decided to bomb this hospital. Katniss, absolutely heartbroken, begins to make a really powerful speech to the districts to wake them up to what's happening. She says that basically, look at it. This is what the capital will do. They don't care about us. And President Snow, fire is catching. This was her last message to President Snow to basically wake him up to, look, I'm the Mockingjay, I'm here, you're not getting rid of me. Katniss then goes back to Coin, and Coin comes up with a mission in which they go to District 2 to pretty much break down the barricade of this kind of peacekeeper regime. Now, the interesting detail I think about this place is it kind of reminds me a little bit of something from Star Wars, this kind of fortress of peacekeepers. It's described in the book as a kind of giant mountain in the middle of like a town. I also like how the streets are kind of described as like bits of circuitry in a sort of way. It's like as if the whole city is encased and that is kind of the stronghold. But back to the point, Gale comes up with a plan in where essentially he's going to trap all the peacekeepers inside. Katniss is very opposed to this plan, not necessarily because he wants to trap them inside, but because he doesn't want them to have an exit. She manages to get everyone to come to a compromise in which all the peacekeepers who decide to essentially put down their arms and surrender will have to meet the rebellion at the front gates. After this mission, Katniss and a group of rebels then essentially go to the capital in hopes of finally catching Snow. If they capture Snow, then he can be executed and trialed for his crimes. However, once getting into the capital, they find it very hard as Snow has fortified the whole entire city. He has left things known as pods to be breaking apart, and Finnick finds himself at a very untimely death underneath the sewers of the capital. This is due to some mutt mutation that the capital has come up with that decides to take him over. However, he's not the only tragic death in this story. Boggs, one of the commanders, is killed in action very early on. And Prim, poor little Prim, is killed off near the very end of the book when a bunch of parachutes come down on a bunch of innocent children. Katniss watches this unfold and it enrages her even more. Katniss then, a couple hours before the execution of President Snow, goes into a greenhouse only to end up talking to him. He begins to point out to her that maybe President Coin is coming for his seat, and this really, really begins to make you wonder what Coin's real aim is, especially after Katniss has just come out of a meeting in which she has been discussing the idea for them producing another Hunger Games. Except in this Hunger Games, it turns out that Coin wants to use the capital's children against one another. Even though Katniss agrees to this decision, she still feels like in her heart that Snow's playing with her somehow. Previous to this, when she was having the talk with Snow, he uses the words, "I thought we agreed not to lie to one another, Miss Everdeen." And this begins to set in paranoia. Katniss then gets to the execution day, and rather than killing Snow dead on the spot with her arrow, which she originally intended, she decides to shoot President Coin. Katniss is then sent back to District 12 along with Haymitch to essentially be left under house arrest. However, she's not the only one. It turns out that Peter has also been sent back there, and the pair manage to, even though the pair of them are a little bit broken, to rekindle their relationship. Eventually, the pair of them have children, and they begin to sing under a tree. Katniss and Peter also decide to write a book up of all the people who have fallen and all the tributes and everyone who has been suffering over the course of the Hunger Games and more. Katniss then talks to Peter about the prospect of how she can essentially get across to her own children the horrors that they had faced. And Peter points out to her that essentially they will get through it together, no matter what. So, what did I think of the Mockingjay? Well, I watched the film a very long time ago, and I've only recently just finished today the book. I feel like the very strong point of the Mockingjay, whether the film's in two parts or the book is, I just feel like the story itself has such a strong and ambitious message to people, not only about war, not only about travesty, not only about massacres, but also about this kind of concept of people playing games with people's lives. The Hunger Games as a whole is an absolutely revolutionary story. Not just about children being chucked into a district, but society and a government really having to ask themselves, how far do we go to keep control? And in President Snow and President Coin's point of view in both of this, it really, really starts to plague you on this idea of who really is the bad guy in this. Is it President Coin? Is it President Snow? I mean, from what I've watched of the Hunger Games over as a whole, I definitely feel like President Snow is this kind of dark, overlooming Darth Vader sort of figure. However, President Coin and a lot of other figures over the line have started to feel like more like Palpatine compared to Snow. Snow is the foot soldier. He carries out orders. He takes things from a very interesting point of view, but the guy knows that there is some form of level to his madness. And the one thing that is so prominent in the Mockingjay is that Snow knows he's lost. He just knows it. This guy is sitting in a greenhouse coughing his lungs out because he knows the game's up. You've put the children in the Hunger Games, you've made them play, you've threatened to kill Katniss, and that bad bitch is on your arse. And she ain't messing around. And that is where I think Katniss and Snow really have an understanding in this book, because it's like she knows and she's kind of giving him that kind of look, you've done this now, you're getting executed. And he kind of goes back to, I know, and I give up. But at the same time, I feel like the other strong element is like Haymitch and everyone trying to stick by Katniss during this. The other brilliant part of this story as a whole is this isn't just a story so much about winning or losing, but it's a story about a broken woman. Like, Katniss is just that. She is a broken, growing woman who, as a youngster, was thrown into a games to save her little sister, and now she has had so much trauma. She's watched people die, she's watched people be shot down for their beliefs, and it shook her to the core, and that is what's made her the Mockingjay. And for that reason, I give Hunger Games The Mockingjay a solid 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next book/film review, or just review in general. Have an incredible night, you beautiful people.